Je vais vous présenter le duo de Leasure Project, qui est un duo montréalais formé de Meredith et de Susannah Wesley. Donc, ces deux jeunes personnes ont eu un parcours un peu similaire, même si elles ne l'ont pas fait en même temps. Mais le destin a fait qu'elles se sont rencontrées finalement. Elles ont toutes deux un bagage en histoire de l'art et surtout en pratique d'art visuel à l'Université Concordia. Ensuite, elles ont toutes deux été à la Glasgow School, dans le fond, à Glasgow, en Écosse, qui est une université très prestigieuse en art visuel. Elles se sont rencontrées là-bas et elles sont revenues, une à Montréal, mais pas en même temps. Puis finalement, au fil des années, en 2004, elles se sont retrouvées à Montréal pour finalement créer ce qu'elles appellent Leasure Project. Ce qu'il y a de fascinant dans Leasure Project, j'en parlerai pas trop parce que c'est ce dont elles vont vous parler, mais juste vous dire que ce qu'il y a de particulier, c'est que c'est une pratique en art collaborative et aussi une pratique commissariale en même temps. Donc, c'est très intéressant. Puis, je vais vous laisser en leur compagnie. Elles vont vous présenter certains de leurs projets, dans le fond. Comme ça va visuellement, vous allez pouvoir mieux comprendre finalement ce qu'elles font. Et puis, ce qui arrive, c'est que Meredith et Susannah comprennent très bien le français. Elles peuvent le parler aussi, mais elles sont beaucoup plus à l'aise en anglais. Elles ont quand même bien voulu présenter une introduction en français. Puis ensuite, avec le support visuel, elles vont peut-être faire quelques interventions en anglais. Si jamais il y a des gens qui ne comprennent pas, on a une traductrice simultanée, si vous voulez, Gentille-Anne, qui s'est portée, qui a décidé d'aider là-dedans. Mais je pense que ça devrait aller vu qu'il y a un support visuel. Là. Fait que je vous laisse avec Susannah et Meredith. Merci d'être là.
Ou même, juste pour dire que s'il y a des questions ou clarifications en français, c'est sûr qu'on peut répondre. On va parler un petit peu de notre processus collaboratif. C'est une des raisons où c'est plus simple et plus utile pour nous de parler en anglais parce que l'endroit est notre espace collaboratif. La langue, c'est anglais. Donc, on a ce petit esprit de finir des phrases de l'autre. Donc, en français,
je ne pense pas qu'on peut le faire en français.
On ne partage pas cette langue. On vient de cet autre pays, l'Ontario. Donc, on participe au milieu de beaux-arts et architecture à Montréal. Donc, nous deux, on a habité à Montréal pour quelques années, puis pour les projets éducatifs, mais aussi, moi, j'ai travaillé au Centre canadien d'architecture comme membre de leur équipe curatoriale. Donc, pour moi, c'était très intéressant, les images de l'arpenteur qui ont été partie de la discussion, même aussi cette idée de le troisième paysage, qui était partie aussi des projets au Centre canadien d'architecture. Mais aujourd'hui, je donne la parole à Susannah pour un petit introduction.
Aujourd'hui, on va parler de notre practice. Et on va vraiment...
on va toucher sur quelques sujets qui, pour nous, sont clés dans notre recherche, mais aussi qu'on a pensé sont intéressants pour cette conférence en particulier. On va toucher sur l'idée de paysage comme endroit fictif, imaginatif, partagé. Et
aussi l'histoire, l'importance de l'histoire sociale aussi pour nous comme un espace d'imagination. Et aussi notre travail comme collaboratif aussi, c'est un autre
lieu. En fait.
Oui.
On a pensé que c'était très intéressant, l'introduction aussi de l'idée de temps, parce que le passage de temps, l'expérience de temps, c'est quelque chose qui est très intéressant pour nous aussi. On fait beaucoup de recherches dans les archives muséales. Puis, tu vas voir, vous voyez que dans notre expérience, c'est intéressant d'apporter les histoires du passé dans le présent. Donc, il y a quelques interventions dans l'espace où on veut avoir une expérience différente de le temps réel, le temps fictif.
C'est vraiment de créer une atmosphère.
Différent.
Oui, différent. Okay.
And we thought it was interesting to talk a little bit about the idea of collaboration, and we thought this was an interesting project that's something that we're just starting to work on, that shows for us as our goal was to create a moment of a collaborative action. And so we called this project a shared puff.
And so in a lot of our practice, we've also kind of examined leisure projects for us is like a world unto itself that's neither Meredith or Susannah, but leisure projects with its own personality and its own voice, and it's really its own space. And we find that it's kind of magical, and it's interesting to think about, and it's really our own. And so we've intermittently made work or dealt with our collaborative practice.
Certain metaphoric moments that we see that can represent a shared conversation or how you share a thought. In that particular moment was a moment outside of time, like the smoke break or the coffee break, where you get to have a more informal, casual conversation, was what we were thinking about initially. And we had this idea of a puff of smoke being, just an incredibly ephemeral moment that can occur. And so using, this kind of a pipe smoking tradition was also a kind of a funny way to play with this.
Mm-hmm. This isn't a finished work, by the way.
But a lot of times we have engaged in these kind of private performances because we're maybe a little bit shy also. So these kind of private performances that allow us to do research by living a different kind of moment. And this is a part of some research we were doing at the Wilhelm Reich Trust in Organon in Maine, which is an interesting landscape as it was part of Wilhelm Reich's whole research around cloud busting and various other things.
Well, I won't get into that whole thing, but the location why Wilhelm Reich had chosen Organon was like specifically because of the parallel and its space.
The idea of the lake that's over top of a rock shale had a particular geographic condition that he felt was really conducive to his experimentation with exploding clouds and causing rain.
And argon energy.
Which is a really large project, and then we are making kind of a micro intervention of a very tiny cloud. So we thought it was interesting. When we first started the project in 2004, we didn't really start it as necessarily a project that we thought we would work together on for 10 years, or coming up on 10 years. It was really a way to engage in a different kind of way and to bring together different ideas that we had come across while we were in Glasgow and to bring them back to Canada. And
we kind of became Leasure because we were looking a lot at the space of leisure as on one hand we were doing our collaboration on our leisure time when we weren't working, but also we were just like looking at art as leisure and
this kind of free space
free space, which goes back to this idea of the break, but also the idea that a leisure space is a free space, but then it's also a space that you really have to build and you have to work at, because it doesn't just come on its own. And leisure is something that we work at, like we have to maintain it, like you maintain a relationship. And I think, I don't know, I was going to say there's like connections. We've always been very interested in the idea of landscape, and I think that that's because in landscape we can kind of find
a different kind of narrative that plays out spatially, potentially.
It's kind of another space that we can put our imagination into. And also, it's obviously has a lot of connections to the idea of leisure, like leisure in the landscape. And ideas of like Arcadia and like landscape has a very loaded history of created landscapes versus natural landscapes. And leisure also has, you know, you have to create leisure, but leisure is, it's like leisure versus labor in a way. And it's kind of in parallel to landscape.
A lot of the kind of landscape histories that keep recurring in the project have to do with Canadian landscape in different places. So a lot of our practice has been collaborative residencies, traveling to different locations to look, as I said, at archival imagery. And sometimes they can be created landscapes. Here we have some material we collected while we were in Banff. And had never been to Banff, but had really thought of it as this kind of magical place where people were dancing in front of mountains. And a lot of the material we had looked at before we went was actually promotional material that was created to encourage that sort of imaginary of that place. And then we had the opportunity to go there and found that it was actually quite different.
Is this on slideshow?
No, so we had this kind of interesting tension between our projected fantasy of Banff, but then actually the much richer reality in a lot of ways. Partly because a lot of the history of the Banff Centre comes out of people trying to experience culture differently in nature. So kind of amateur cultural groups that would do readings in the forest or create outdoor plays, and then they became more formalized later into what we now understand as the Banff Centre.
But I think something that became really interesting to us was how Banff became a space where women could thrive in a way that wasn't happening in other places. So the Banff Centre was really founded by women, and also women came up from cities in the United States and all over the place to just live in the wild and climb mountains and like live really unconventional lifestyles in the 1800s and early 1900s. And there was just like this amazing history of like, I don't know, women figure skaters skating on, what do you call them? The glaciers.
So we found that actually the kind of real imaginary space of Banff was much more revolutionary than the created imaginary of the Banff Centre that we had already engaged with. And so some of the kind of things that we were doing while we were there were...
This was in 2007.
2007.
Yeah.
We're trying out what it would be like to be those people that were mixing their reading with mountain climbing, or that were reading theory by Lake Louise, or were engaging in salon-style events where they would get together and exchange ideas. It just seemed this amazing spirit of pioneering another way of thinking that was highly charged culturally, but also taking place in an outdoor environment.
And what happens, I guess, when this like kind of really sublime landscape that's not at all like the kind of manicured landscape, what happens when women end up in that landscape, how they kind of, I don't know, I guess traditionally like women have been associated with pastoral landscape in a really like ideas of femininity, but then when you get out into a kind of sublime landscape, things begin to change. So that was another side of our interest also.